My son brought a folder to Thanksgiving dinner. Not wine. Not a pie from that bakery on Elgin Street he knows I love. A manila folder, thick with papers, held together with a rubber band, set down on my kitchen table like it was the most natural thing in the world. I was still wearing my oven mitts. "Mom, we need to talk about some things before everyone else gets here," he said. He'd arrived 45 minutes early. I remember thinking that was strange. My son is never early for anything. He was late to his own university graduation. He was late to his father's funeral. But that afternoon, he was standing in my kitchen in Canada before the turkey had even finished resting, pulling papers out of a folder while I stood there holding a dish towel. His wife was with him. She smiled at me the way you smile at someone you've already made a decision about. I told them to sit down. I poured myself a coffee. I offered them nothing. The folder, it turned out, contained 3 things: a brochure for a senior's residence in Nepean, all-exposed brick and activity calendars, and photos of silver-haired women doing watercolor, a document from what appeared to be a law office, and a letter, handwritten, that my daughter-in-law had clearly drafted and that my son had clearly signed without reading carefully enough because there was a phrase in the 3rd paragraph that he would never have chosen himself. The phrase was, "cognitive decline." I am 68 years old. I walk 4 kilometers every morning along the Rideau River. I do the Globe and Mail crossword in pen. I have managed my own finances, my own home, my own health, my own everything for 11 years since my husband passed, without asking either of my children for a single thing except help moving the chest freezer to the garage. I do not have cognitive decline. I have a son who married a woman who saw my house and started doing arithmetic. I didn't say any of that. I sat down across from them, wrapped both hands around my mug, and let them talk. My son's name is Christopher. He's 41. He works in project management for a tech firm downtown and makes good money, or used to, before he and his wife renovated their town's house in Barhaven and then renovated it again 18 months later because she'd changed her mind about the open concept. I don't say this to be unkind. I say it because it matters to what happened next. His wife, I'll call her what my sister calls her, which is the situation. Her name is Melanie. She's organized in the way that people are organized when they want to control things. She keeps a shared family calendar that I was added to without being asked. She sends group texts with subject lines. She once brought a laminated schedule to Christmas dinner. She is not a bad person. Exactly. She is a person who decided some time ago that I was a problem to be managed, and she has been quietly, cheerfully managing ever since. I had known for a while that something was being planned. You don't raise children without learning to read the silences between them. My daughter called me in September. She lives in Halifax. We talk every Sunday. And she was careful in a way she's usually not. Asked how I was feeling. Asked if I'd been to the doctor lately. Asked about the house, whether it was getting to be a lot. I told her the house was fine, and asked her directly if her brother had put her up to calling. She said no. She said it too quickly. Then, my neighbor. She's been next door for 20 years. We shovel each other's driveways. She mentioned, gently, that she'd had a conversation with a young woman who came by asking questions about the neighborhood. Whether it was quiet. Whether there was much foot traffic. Whether older residents generally managed well on their own. My neighbor thought she was a real estate agent. I knew better. So by the time my son sat down at my Thanksgiving table with his folder, I was not surprised. I was ready. But I let him go first, because I have learned in 68 years that it is almost always better to let people show you exactly how far they're willing to go before you respond. He went quite far. The residence in Nepean, he said, was wonderful, independent living, mostly with some support services, very modern. A gym, a library, a shuttle to the Merivale Road shopping center on Thursdays. He and Melanie had already toured it. They'd put my name on a waiting list, he said, just to hold a spot, just in case, no pressure. I looked at the brochure. The monthly fee was listed on the back page. $4,200 a month, not including what they called premium amenity packages. My house, which I have owned free and clear since we paid off the mortgage in 2019, is worth somewhere north of $800,000 in the current market. I knew, as I sat there holding that brochure, exactly what math was being done on the other side of the table. I set the brochure down. I picked up the document from the law office. It was a power of attorney form. Not filled out, not signed, but clearly prepared. My name was typed at the top. My son's name was typed in the designated field below it. "It's just a precaution," Melanie said. "Everyone should have one, at your age. It's responsible planning. I have a power of attorney. I have had one for 11 years. My lawyer and my sister are named in it. I did not mention this. Who prepared this?" I asked. My son named a law office I didn't recognize. Not my lawyer, not anyone I'd ever spoken to. "We just wanted to make sure you were protected," he said. I nodded slowly. I looked at the handwritten letter, the one with the phrase cognitive decline in the third paragraph. The one that suggested, with great gentleness and great condescension, that perhaps I should allow my son and his wife to help me make some decisions, including decisions about the property, which was, after all, a significant asset that deserved careful management. Careful management by them was what it meant. I folded the letter. I placed it back in the folder. I picked up my coffee mug. "The turkey needs another 20 minutes, I said. "Why don't you two go sit in the living room?" Here is what they didn't know. 12 days before Thanksgiving, I had a meeting with my actual lawyer. A woman I've worked with for 9 years, who has an office on Bank Street and who does not suffer fools. I brought her everything I knew. The questions my daughter had been coached to ask. The woman who'd knocked on my neighbor's door. A voicemail from my son, saved, in which he mentioned, casually, as if in passing, that the house might be more than I needed now. My lawyer listened. Then she said, "Let's make sure there's nothing they can do." We spent 2 hours in her office. By the end of it, I had done the following. Updated my will, which now leaves the house and all assets to a revocable living trust. Made clear designations for both my children, equal, fair, not generous beyond what I'd always intended, but clearly documented and dated, so there could be no argument about competence or capacity. Contacted my bank and placed a notation on all accounts. And signed paperwork to put the house, my house, the house I have lived in for 26 years, the house where my children grew up, where we brought the dog home from the shelter, where my husband and I planted the garden that still blooms every May, into a trust that I control entirely, and that cannot be touched without my explicit direction. My sister, who lives in Sudbury and who has always had better judgment than me about people, flew down that weekend. We sat in my kitchen and drank tea, and she said, "Good," in that flat, certain way she has, and that was enough. I also called my daughter. The real call, not the careful Sunday one. I told her what I knew. I told her that I wasn't angry, but that I needed to know where she stood. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she was sorry. She said she'd known it was wrong and she hadn't said so. She said it had been Melanie's idea originally, and Christopher had been convinced that it was about protecting me, that he genuinely believed, or had talked himself into believing, that he was helping. I told her I believed that too, about Christopher. That was almost worse. I told her I loved her. I told her to come for Christmas. I told her not to tell her brother what we'd talked about. She asked why. I told her to trust me. Thanksgiving dinner was not uncomfortable, exactly. I have hosted enough dinners in my life to keep things moving through sheer force of social momentum. The turkey was good. The stuffing was the recipe my mother gave me, with celery and sage and a splash of dry vermouth. My son talked about a project at work. Melanie talked about the townhouse renovation. The third one now, apparently, something about the primary bathroom. I listened and nodded and passed things and refilled glasses. After dinner, while I was making tea, Melanie came into the kitchen. She stood with her back against the counter, and she said, in a low voice, as if we were sharing a confidence, "I hope you know we only want what's best for you." Christopher worries. We both do. I handed her a mug. I said, "I know," she said, "the power of attorney, it really is just practical. My parents did one when they turned 60. It's just smart planning," I said. "I already have one." She paused. "Oh," she said. "With who?" I told her my lawyer's name and my sister's name. She set the mug down. Something moved behind her eyes. Not quite panic. Recalculation. Of course, she said. That makes total sense. We just didn't realize. I said, there's quite a bit you don't realize, Melanie. I said it pleasantly. I was still smiling. I picked up the tea tray and carried it into the living room. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, my son called. He said he and Melanie had been thinking, and they felt the conversation about the residents hadn't gone as they'd hoped. And they thought maybe we should sit down again, the three of us, and talk it through properly. He said the waiting list spot was still held, that it cost nothing to keep it, that they just wanted me to have options. I let him finish. Then I said, Christopher, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen. He said he was listening. I told him the house was in a trust. I told him I'd updated my will. I told him I'd spoken to my lawyer. I told him, clearly and without any emotion I didn't actually feel, that I understood he had been persuaded that this was about caring for me, but that what had actually been built, the folder, the form, the spot on the waiting list, the woman who knocked on my neighbor's door, was a plan to take away my autonomy, and that I had been watching it develop for months. There was a long silence. He said, Mom, that's not what this was. I said, I know you believe that. He said, Melanie she cares. She wanted to be prepared. I said, prepared for what exactly? Another silence. I said, I am 68 years old. I am healthy. I am competent. I am capable. I know where my passport is. I know what's in my savings accounts. I know who my doctor is and what my prescriptions are and what I want done if I'm ever in a position where I can't speak for myself. And I have documented all of it, legally, with a lawyer who has known me for 9 years. What I needed from you was not a folder. What I needed from you was a phone call asking how I was doing. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm sorry, Mom. I said, I know. I said, I want you to come for Christmas. Without the folder. He said he would. I said, I also want you to have a conversation with your wife about the difference between concern and control. You can tell her I said that. He didn't say anything. I said, I love you, Christopher. I'll talk to you Sunday. And I hung up. My daughter came for Christmas. She drove up from Halifax, which takes about 17 hours, and which she insists on doing alone because she likes the quiet. She arrived on the 23rd with 2 bags and a bottle of scotch from a distillery in Cape Breton, and she stood in my front hall and hugged me for a long time without saying anything. Christopher came on Christmas Eve. He came alone. He stood on my porch with snow on his jacket and a grocery bag from Farm Boy, and he said he'd brought the things for the Brussels sprouts because he remembered that was always his job. I stepped aside and let him in. We didn't say anything about the folder. He made the Brussels sprouts. They were good. Christmas dinner was the 3 of us. We ate in the dining room with the good china. My daughter told a long, winding story about a raccoon that had gotten into her balcony in Halifax and the truly extraordinary lengths she'd gone to address the situation. My son laughed until he was red in the face. I sat at the head of the table where I have always sat, in my house, at my table, and I ate my dinner. After dessert, when we were all holding our coffee mugs and the house was warm and the snow was coming down outside, my son looked at me across the table and said, I really am sorry, Mom. I looked at him. He meant it. I know my son. He had been afraid, genuinely afraid, and he had let that fear be steered in the wrong direction, and he had not pushed back when he should have. That's not nothing, but it is also not something you can just say sorry for once and have it be finished. I know you are, I said. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. He understood. The waiting list spot, I found out later, had cost them a $200 deposit to hold. I didn't ask for it back. What I did do in February was invite my sister down for a week. We walked along the Rideau Canal, which was still frozen at the edges, and had lunch at a place on Somerset Street, and I told her everything from beginning to end. She listened without interrupting, which is a skill very few people have, and when I finished, she said, What are you going to do now? I told her I was going to do exactly what I'd been doing. Get up in the morning, walk my 4 kilometers, do my crossword, tend my garden when it was warm enough, see my doctor, call my daughter on Sundays, have my son over for dinner, live in my house, which is mine, which no one can touch. That's it, she said. I said, That's everything. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window at the canal. Good, she said. And it was.